every time someone tells me that they've listened to an episode, and like, you know, it's just amazing.
All the listeners at home, Mariam's eyes are welling up a little bit now.
You're listening to Climate Curious, a podcast for people who care about the world but find the current conversation about climate change confusing, boring, or scary.
My name is Mariam Pasha, and I'm the director and curator at TEDx London and co-host of this podcast, along with the amazing Ben Hurst. Say hello, Ben.
Hey there, friends. I'm Ben Hurst, activist and advocate exploring what positive masculinities can look like, humble model, and climate normal.
All right, Ben, it is that time again.
It is.
It's time for the best of season 3.
Climate Curious.
I don't know how to follow that.
Sorry.
Right, we've had, you know, I actually really wanted to record this episode, if you remember, at the end of Countdown.
Yeah, no, that was a big no.
A big no from you, I remember.
Yeah, I was rattled. I was so
we
ill.
were so done. We were so done. We were so emotional. And I'm actually kind of glad. I think if we had recorded it on that day, it would have just been a lot of crying.
Yeah, it would have just been like
we were so done.
Real depression about having to go home.
Yeah, it was quite an experience. I'm really hoping that everyone who's been listening to the episodes has had like a little bit of that experience with us.
Yeah, I hope that they got to share in that journey with us.
Yeah, it was really special because we got to do it live for the first time and actually be in the same room with our guests, which was just amazing, just unreal. And we had some real, I think, breakthroughs.
Yeah.
And moments, and also some great fun. So we want to take you on that journey and give you some of our highlights, right?
Yes.
Okay, I think we
Sorry,
know.
I'm leaving you to say all of the
That's
things.
fine.
But yeah.
So I think we know where we have to start.
Yeah.
Like there's no question.
In the nuclear explosion of ideas that absolutely shattered my reality into several thousand pieces.
Yes. I mean there is no better description.
It was literally I feel like that whole episode I was just broken. Like I just sat there trying to say things and really having like an earthquake in my brain.
It was. I think it was like that for everyone who also got to watch the talk from this speaker.
Yeah.
So we're obviously, if you've listened to the season, you will know, referring to Zipporah Berman and her incredible episode and TED talk that she did around
so good.
Fossil fuels being the new weapons of mass destruction.
Right. And it was, oh man, that was really, really intense. Like properly rattling.
When I was looking through the episode, it's like just incredible fact after incredible fact after incredible. It's just like a whole page highlighted in yellow of things that we loved from that episode. It's just amazing.
It's not even a script, but like the whole thing was just unreal. You know what? Maybe let's stop and hear a snippet from Zipporah's episode.
The words oil, gas, and coal don't even appear in the fossil fuel in the Paris Agreement. They're not there.
Serious?
And neither do the words fossil fuels. They don't appear in the Paris Agreement because the industry wants itself to be invisible. That's what they've been doing for years. They've been putting the onus on individuals. It's your fault. You're not wearing a sweater. You're turning your heat up too high. Right. You're driving a car. You people using plastic straws. It's your fault. And meanwhile, the very few companies on the planet that are making the majority of profits on the planet are producing the 3 products that they've known for decades are destroying our climate. And they've made themselves invisible, and they've made continued production of it okay because we just have to negotiate emissions and we all have to try and reduce emissions. But meanwhile, they're going to keep producing more and more products. It's like drugs, right? Yeah. Here it is, everybody. Here it is. There's so much of it. But then they're going to make us feel bad for using it.
I mean, from the fact that fossil fuels don't appear in the Paris Agreement, which is the agreement on climate change. Well, it was until COP at least.
Oh, well, we thought it was, but evidently it's about something very different.
But, and also just the idea that, this shift, now it seems so obvious, but I think at the time when we interviewed her, the real moment for me was fully starting to internalize exactly what the fossil fuel industry has done. And they've essentially made fools of us over the last I don't know, 60, 70, 80 years, knowing the damage they were causing, hiring companies to like shift the blame to us, and then having the audacity to pretend like they're changing and that they're kind of, you know, I don't know, the shift to individual responsibility and that the fact that she says, you know, they made themselves invisible. It was just real. It was real.
And do you know what it was for me? I think being in the room in person, that was the first time for me that I felt the anger and the frustration in real time. Do you know what I mean? Like I think we do a really good job on this podcast of keeping it quite light, quite jovial. Like there's hope and it's good, and we can fix it, or we can save stuff, and the situation isn't that bad. But that was my first time being face to face with someone who has really given their life to this cause, and was pissed off about it. And I think that she did a really good job of not like spiraling into like anger, but it was like productive. Tangible,
I mean, I think that's for me you're right, like one of the most amazing and impressive things about Zipporah, but also so many people we met, is that they have been talking about this for so many years. They've been going on and on about it. People haven't been listening. And instead of just throwing up their hands in frustration and, I don't know, going to get some desk job and just like going on holiday and enjoying everything they're doing, they're still trying. And I think I think that you're right. That was just absolutely amazing. And I think this episode was definitely one that shook it just shook my understanding of the world.
I think this is one that I would really recommend to people who are struggling with the concept of personal responsibility. Like I think that this does a really good job of shifting your perspective from this being about you as an individual and the choices that you're making, and also redirects that energy, because I do think we still need to do something, but redirects it in a really helpful way into like, we should lobby the government, or we should do this, or we should do that, which I think is so important, because I think that perspective is quite liberating actually, in a lot of ways, especially when you're faced with, like, I remember doing this and thinking, this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's actually real life. Like it sounds like the most unrealistic thing ever, that fossil fuels wouldn't be in the Paris Agreement. Like all that is wild, absolutely wild,
and that they got away with it for so long. I mean, they've got it now in COP, which is great. But I think definitely, I really love that framing, Ben. Like if you are, and I think all of us who have been exploring climate change have had that moment where we're thinking, but the things I do and out in the world, and what's the balance, and how much is my, like how do I both be responsible and act but not drive myself nuts trying to be this all perfect, and then what about the responsibility of these companies? And so definitely Zipporah, that was a highlight. And I think we could just talk about that for the next like 30 minutes. But
we're just going to do this for the whole episode actually.
I want to talk about an incredible interview we did with an unexpectedly wonderful topic and individual.
Yes, yeah. I think this might have been my favourite one of the whole season, actually, if I'm being honest. This was so good.
Tell all the listeners who we're talking about and why.
Okay, so Ermias Kabrab was our guest who spoke about, I've never heard this. He spoke about cow burps. And this is really, really important. First and foremost, because I thought the problem here was cow farts. But actually, we're talking about something wildly different. Not too far removed, but different, which is important. And how, so I think the idea.
And also, don't you feel bad that for a really long time we've been so down on cows farting, and it turns out that's not what
they're not even doing that. They're not even doing that.
I felt really bad.
Absolutely brutal. Like really, really have demonized them and stigmatized them
as these,
for
like,
a long time.
Disgusting.
No. 4 stomachs farting all the time, but no, it's not farts, just burps.
Just burps.
Which are
with 4
much
stomachs,
less offensive.
It's quite understandable.
Yeah. And the problem, sorry for everybody listening, the problem with these cow burps is that they contain methane, right? A lot of methane, which is, I think, the fastest.
Yeah, so methane heats our planet faster than any other greenhouse gas. And so even if it doesn't last as long as, let's say, carbon dioxide, it does more damage in a shorter amount of time. So if we cut methane quickly, it buys us some time to be able to do the work we need to do to cut CO2.
Right, and Ermias's work is really, really, really important because he gives us a way to do this, right?
Yes.
So not even to pull the methane out of the sky, out of the ozone or whatever it is, wherever it's floating around, the atmosphere, that's the one I'm looking for. But to stop the production of it.
Yes, at the source.
Right, which is super important. And the solution, for those of you who have not listened, is seaweed.
Seaweed, a very special kind of seaweed.
A very special kind of seaweed.
I remember this episode for two things. One serious and one not so serious. And I'll start with the not so serious, which is that I was like extremely concerned that the seaweed would taste bad.
Yeah, for the cows. Because that's cruel. That is cruelty to animals.
It turns out that actually it has no taste impact. So if anyone was wondering. But the reason I actually really love this is because it's funny and it's about cow farts or burps. Sorry, cow burps.
Get it right.
And it's about a serious topic, methane. But what I loved about Ermias and is that, with his background and where he's from, he wasn't just, because you can take this, because of his background and where he's from, he understood this on a very different level than maybe other climate scientists. This idea that all around the world, in large parts of society, people do not have access to meat very often. And so they're not going to give up eating it because it's very important that they have access to it as much as they can, which is nowhere near us who can have it every single day for multiple meals.
Yeah, just get it from the supermarket.
And it's important for their nutrition, right? And malnutrition is an incredibly devastating thing that can happen, especially in childhood. And so for me, I thought he really embodied this kind of intersectional perspective that we're always talking about on the podcast, right?
Yeah, and there's something also like really humbling, I think, about that conversation in particular, which is like coming to terms with the fact that this person for a lot of their careers probably felt quite ostracized by the climate community. Look at me talking about the climate community. I didn't even know this existed until like 3 years ago, but felt quite ostracized by the community, and was made to believe that they were working on something that was a waste of time, which actually is like a real solution, like a real-time problem solver. And the cows don't, just so you know, the cows don't actually like chew up the seaweed, right? It's ground down into like a fine powder that can be put into their food. So super, super, super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ermias explains this a lot better than I have attempted to do. So maybe let's listen to a clip of him talking about it.
Let's go to the video tape.
Yeah.
People would say, instead of fiddling with this and that, why don't you just stop eating meat and dairy? And I come from a low-income country, one of the poorest countries actually. And getting animal source food like milk and meat and egg is a luxury. And so when I first moved, I came to study here in the UK actually. I spent about 10 years in England, and I was just having hamburgers almost every day.
Living the high life.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, having meat, it's like it's luxury. I mean, when it's a big holiday, we have chicken and maybe you have lamb and stuff like that. But when it's not holiday, it's you don't get as much access to meat as you would like. And I think for adults it's okay, but I think for me the biggest problem is for children, because children, they do need this dense food. They do need macronutrients, iron and zinc and manganese and all these kind of things. They really need it. And if they don't have it, the issues, they become stunted. And stunting is really one of the worst diseases, because basically they will never get to their potential. Because with the stunting, they're not growing as they should be growing. Right. So it affects them for the rest of their life. So it's not just for them, the whole community, they're not going to be as productive as they would have been. So it's the lifetime sentence. most people in the world do not live in high-income countries. Most people live in low-income countries. They don't have access to high-quality food, and there's a lot of inequality going on. And in some cultures, maybe mostly the men eat the meat and stuff, and women and children do not. But if you allow them, or if you help them to get raise chickens and have eggs, then eggs would be great for the kids, for pregnant women, So I think those kind of foods are not inherently bad.
Right.
It's basically these are needed, but we have to control how much of this is. We need to eat them according to our requirements. Having too much of it is not good.
And I think we looked at that. I think one of the things that was so wonderful about being at Countdown was being able to connect with these, individuals, scientists, activists, doctors, etc., who from all around the world. So it wasn't just one perspective. And another incredible individual was Shweta Narayan. So Shweta Narayan, who is this incredible social worker from India and looks at the intersection of health and climate change. And I think that we're starting to think about health differently because of the pandemic, and I think that's especially true. We're not just talking about a sick planet, we're talking about people who are getting sick as well. And I think that especially, somewhere like India, for example, where air pollution is and will continue to be for a long time such an issue, it is really important for someone to come at it from this perspective. Just like Ermias comes at it from a different perspective. I really appreciated that. And we had that with a couple of different guests.
Yeah. And you say social worker. In my mind, I think doctor, I think that's because it's linked to that idea of do no harm, right?
Yes.
Like what is the Hippocratic Oath. And that framing of the climate crisis for me was like really, really monumental, like a big shift in my mind. So not just thinking about this like through the terms of, the planet and like actually considering that this is really doing harm to people and how do we stop that from happening? That's a responsibility that all of us have.
Absolutely. And I think that also what I love about that episode, what I love about the work that she does, and just also this perspective that's starting to become more part of the conversation, the climate conversation, is people. Like I think for so long it was polar bears and plants and
save the penguins.
Which and I have to tell you, I love polar bears.
Yeah.
I love some plants. I'm all for saving those things. I love me some polar bears. But at the end of the day, I really care about people, right?
Yeah.
And so I find it really refreshing that we're starting to get this perspective about people and about the impacts, because it's the impacts of climate change on people. It's the health, it's the livelihoods, it's all that stuff. So I think I was just really excited at Countdown and also in general to start seeing more conversations about people. I want to bring in the bit here from Shweta actually for us to hear.
It will affect you, and the unfortunate part, and that's what we're trying to stop, is that the poor cannot become our shield in protecting.
Right.
We cannot. That's wrong.
Yeah.
And that's why in tackling with climate crisis, equity and justice has to be at the center of it.
Right.
And one way to bring in equity and justice is from the reference of health. And that's why health with equity and justice has to be at the center of all our solutions.
Right. And I think it moves toward this kind of like really, really important narrative, like you say, that people are what's not necessarily at the center of this, but an equal part of the pie. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I actually think that when we don't think about people as part of this, is because we're not thinking about the most vulnerable people who are going to be the first affected and the most affected.
Yeah.
So, but talking about people, I also have to tell you that someone else that I super loved was Vishaan Chakrabarti.
Oh my gosh, what a
Professor Skyscraper.
Yo, the New Yorker.
And the New Yorker.
What a guy.
And I love that because obviously we have we both live in cities.
Yeah.
We love cities. We're all about cities.
Yeah.
And it's so refreshing to have someone who also loves cities.
I mean,
talking about climate change,
so
right?
important, and talking about it in a way where it's not like you are the enemy because you live
the problem.
I mean, like you are the person that's immediately causing this problem. So many interesting facts. I feel like I say this about every single person, but I've really never considered any of the stuff that he was talking about in terms of like people being centralized in one space and maybe how that might help us rather than hinder us. I remember talking about the traffic and like new methods of transportation, about where we're placing buildings, about energy saving and how much power people are using in certain areas, and the benefits of like people sharing spaces with one another, rather than playing into this idea of all of us being like individualistic and needing to live in houses out in the countryside and that solving the problem, when actually that creates more of a problem.
So absolutely right. And the thing that this episode did was connect two things for me in my brain, which is that, of course, we blame cities, right? Of course, we blame people in cities, because people in cities are poor and they're brown and they're working class often. And so we become the people who are the source of the problem, right? Yeah. Not the people living out in the countryside. And not to like, obviously there's
blame them instead.
Not that I'm saying we blame them, because there are lots of issues that rural people have to face every single day that are, you know, just as effective on their life. But when it comes to like the climate conversation, there's definitely this focus on the city lifestyle being part of the problem. And there's obviously part of the problem, but it also what I loved about Vishaan is it also showed us how it can become a major part of the solution, and how that collective shared communal thinking that when you live in a city, you don't even think about, right? Because you share things all the time, can be just so essential. Oh, I really want us to listen to this bit from Vishaan again.
The average New Yorker uses a third less energy than the average American.
Oh, really?
Because we take the metro to work, we walk, we live in apartments that heat and cool each other. It's not because we're angels. Believe me, New Yorkers are far from angels. It's just the lifestyle is more of a collective lifestyle. And because we have collective infrastructure, we actually use a lot less carbon. Now, cities are still a hot mess. They use way more emissions than they should, or produce much more carbon than they should. They're heat islands. So there's a lot to do in cities. Like, we need to green our cities, for instance. You know, the flooding and things that are taking place in cities, we need more just like porous surface that absorbs water. And a lot of us are fighting to electrify the grid with clean energy, right? And so there's a lot of things we need to do.
Ben and I have been working on something rather exciting.
Yes, we have. TEDx London Women is back on February the 27th, and we wanted to invite you all to join us.
We've got powerful talks, groundbreaking ideas, creative inspiration, perspective-shifting workshops, and a soul-feeding sense of community.
Join thousands of trailblazers to discuss the most pertinent issues in feminism, intersectionality, LGBTQIA+ rights, climate change, and so much more.
Use the discount code ClimateCurious, all one word, to get 10% off your ticket at women.tedxlondon.com. That's women.tedxlondon.com.
Stay curious.
Right, so Mariam, I've been thinking, how did we start this podcast?
That's a great question. So at TEDx London, we're all about ideas worth spreading. We've explored everything from gender and borders to technology and design at our events. We've been doing this for 5 years. And in that journey, Citi has been our headline partner, and they've been with us every step of the way. But when it came to the climate crisis, we needed a new format. We wanted to break out of the red circle, to speak directly to the climate leaders, to ask questions and to be curious. And as always, Citi was there with us, supporting our vision, encouraging us to be courageous and adventurous with our ideas. So thank you, Citi, for making this podcast and all of our work possible. For the love of ideas, for the love of curiosity, for the love of progress. Citi. Now back to the show. Also, now, we talked about this before, and I have to kind of shout out to this person because I just was so taken with the conversation that we had off and on the podcast. And it links to what we were saying earlier, you know, the thing about Zipporah Berman and the individual responsibility. I think the conversation we had with Isaias Hernandez, you know, this idea that they talked about being an imperfect environmentalist, you know, is is definitely something that I think when you're coming into this conversation, we're coming into this movement, and very much for me, even though I've now been doing this for a couple of years, feel all the time is this like burden of perfectionism and this idea that how can I justify wanting to take a flight,
take a holiday,
having a burger, all these kinds of things when I know what I know.
Yeah.
Right. Here's this great little bit that Isaiah said in his conversation with us here.
Yeah, I would say like within like mental effects, like constantly having to write and be challenged in a good way, critiques, but then also negatively attacked online because of your topics and the way that you're writing is really degrading. It's almost like you're in a classroom constantly getting graded and being like F, or like you didn't talk about this, or like why, or like constantly being angry of like not being excited enough, not being perfect enough. But in reality, I've told my community like I'm going to continue making issues, and we need to like be imperfect environmentalists to be better people in this world. But a lot of the times I think because we live in such a society now of like you need to know all of these things. If you don't know, call out. If you don't know this, call out. But it's like literally like my parents were not always radicalized because they had to be indoctrinated by these systems. Like, I'm sorry it took me like 21 years of my life to kind of unlearn these ideas, and can also challenge my people around me of like how we can unlearn it together, because we have to quote unquote survive in this system that exists, but then also create of other options that exist outside of these systems.
Yeah, there's a massive amount of guilt attached to, and I think not by accident, right? Like by design, which is what we also discovered. But like there's so much guilt that's heaped onto individuals about their lifestyle choices, which can paralyze a person. And I think what Isaiah was saying can really lead to burnout, which means that you can't do any work, right? So I love that idea of like, if you need to go skiing or you need to eat a burger or whatever it is you like to do, shout out to my guy Emmaus as well, eating burgers, I love that. But if you need to do that stuff, do that. And then focus your energy that you gain from doing that into making some kind of impact somewhere else.
Yeah. The other thing I really took away from that conversation was this idea that, it goes back to the people-centricness of this, is that it's also incorrect to talk about how we cause this problem, people cause this problem, and so, we have to, like, people are the problem. Because actually, we didn't also cause this problem.
I mean, who's we? That's the question.
The thing is, who is we? And every time I hear people say that, like, we cause the problem, people are the problem, I think, no, actually, like, 99% of this earth is not the problem.
Right.
It's a very small percentage of us that are.
Right.
And I think it's actually really important to be careful, because what we end up doing is burdening people who are already struggling against a system that is not designed to let them succeed.
Yeah.
And so then we're telling them on top of that struggle, on top of, Isaiah's talked about it, on top of being working class, poor, black, brown, in these communities that are incredibly heavily polluted, etc. We're also putting this burden of responsibility on them that actually we need to be really careful when we say we and people. And actually, I think that's something that conversation really brought to the forefront for me.
Yeah. And so many of us love it, right? Like I'm speaking about myself here more than anybody else. Like, I really enjoy being on a high horse. They call it a high horse because it's nice up there. Do you know what I mean? Like, I really enjoy pointing my fingers at other people and saying that they're the problem. But I think that is an important thing for us to remember, is that actually we need to point our fingers at the right people, and not in a way of pushing the guilt or the blame onto them, but now they have a responsibility to come up with some solutions for the problems,
Absolutely.
right? And they also have the resources to come up with the solutions to the problems, because they're burning all the fossil fuels.
Yeah,
I say they as if it's not me.
We know who we're talking about. About. And actually, I think, the last highlight I'd love to go to is with someone we didn't get to talk to at Countdown,
right? But
I think had an incredible solution that everyone could participate in, who was Katharine Hayhoe, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, like incredible climate scientist, Christian, lives in Texas. These are not normally words that come in a sentence together. Right. She acknowledges that, right?
Oxymorons.
And I absolutely love her. Like, she's just so honest, and I love she gave us just really tangible things that we can do to talk about climate, and why talking about climate is so important with the people around us.
Right, and the centering of conversation as an important piece of the puzzle, right?
Yes.
So not just it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault.
Yeah.
You need to do this, we should do that. But actually, how do we talk to people who don't understand this issue in the same way that we understand it? And also, massive shouts out to Catherine as well, because I have not read a book in a long time, and we read that whole book. That was good, and it was a good book. I think but you're right, it provided so many solutions in terms of how you have these conversations with your uncle at the dinner table, the person who maybe believes but is a conspiracy theorist, or the person who completely disagrees with all of this stuff and blames the other person
and has other priorities. I mean, for me, the other thing there is this idea, like you said, of that talking is valuable. Because I also think, you know how you're saying we can put people down and we can dismiss things? I think we also say, like, talk is cheap. We need to stop talking. We need to start acting. Well, talking is acting. Yeah. Right? And I obviously it's self-serving because...
You like talking.
I like talking.
As do I.
It's not part of this job. But I do actually think that it is valuable. And I think the more people talk about it, you know, the more it becomes part of the conversation for everyone. And it's not like this anomaly of like this person over there that you don't know who does this thing. So I love that we got to talk to her. Yeah. And I love that we got to like ask her how to do things, and she gave us that advice, and just absolutely really practical. Yeah. Really practical.
Meeting people where they are. How do you meet people where they are? If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to that episode, because it's got some real solutions in it. Let's hear that part from Catherine's episode.
So we often are searching for hope in all of the new science that's coming out, and there isn't hope there. I mean, every new study that comes out shows that climate is changing faster to a greater extent than we thought, or it's worse than we thought. And then we turn to looking for hope in politics. And we pin our hopes on a person or a policy, a bill, a piece of legislation, a movement. And when it fails us, as it always does, because nothing's perfect, there is no perfect piece of legislation, policy, or people, certainly not, then we are even more hopeless than we were before. And sometimes we even just hope in hope. Like, if I just bury my head in the sand, like the metaphorical ostrich, everything will be okay. And then we raise up our head after being buried for a while, and it's not okay. It's worse. So those are the places that we look for hope. And when we don't find it, we get even more hopeless. So just a statistic from the United States, you know, in the US, already 70% of people are worried about climate change. And in the UK, I think it's something like 76% of people are worried about climate change already. So the numbers are not as different as you might think. But 50% of people are hopeless and helpless. They don't know where to start, and they don't know what to do. So where our hope comes from is when we start to see that climate action is not a giant boulder sitting at the bottom of an impossibly steep cliff with only a few hands trying to push it up. Those hands belonging to Sir David Attenborough, Jane Goodall, and Greta Thunberg. And we know that if we add our hand to that boulder, it will not budge. It will not budge a single millimeter. And so we think, why bother? They're doing it because they're good people, and I wish them well, but it is not going to happen. In reality, that giant boulder, though, is already at the top of the hill, and it is already rolling down the hill in the right direction. For example, 90% of new energy installed around the world last year was clean energy. We aren't yet at our Paris agreements, but we're a lot better than we were when the Paris Agreement was signed. We were heading for a world that was 4 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial levels.
Well, I think the conclusion here, Ben, is that season 3 was, I'm not going to swear, amazing.
Yes. Beep. Amazing. Yeah.
I actually felt really emotional about being just getting the chance to do it. Yeah. You know, I feel like this at the end of every season, but because we were in person and because of the pandemic, that's become so rare. Yeah. It just felt like such a privilege to just get time and talk, and it was just amazing. And I do feel like every time someone tells me that they've listened to an episode, and like, you know, it's just amazing.
For all the listeners at home, Mariam's eyes are welling up a little bit now.
I'm crying.
Yeah,
if you haven't noticed this already, it is. So I think I was just so thrilled to be able to do this.
So grateful, man. Like it was incredible. I don't really have the words, which is counterproductive on a podcast, but I don't really have very many words to be able to describe that experience. But I think just the ability to be able to connect with people and to be able to connect ideas in the same space. Do you know what I mean? So seeing the people behind those thoughts. And I think actually something really clicked for me, which was that these people are not just climate scientists. They're not just people who just do this and that they're robots for the survival of the planet. Like they're real people who really care about these things for real reasons, and have been impacted and affected and have given their lives to doing this work. So super privileged to have met all of our guests on the episode.
And I think there were so many people we didn't get to speak to.
Oh man,
which inevitably means that
we're going to have to do another season.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
No.
Oh no.
So we can definitely see us for season 4. We'll get to speak to even more awesome leaders, thinkers, doers.
Yes.
Until then,
stay curious.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please rate, subscribe, and share this episode with a curious friend. It makes it possible to keep making this amazing content for you.
Oh, and slide into our DMs at TEDx London and let us know which climate extraordinaires you'd love to hear from next time. Oh, and don't leave yet. We wanted to tell you a bit more about who made this podcast possible.
Yeah, we did. TEDx London's headline partner, City, has been supporting us for the past 5 years to bring world-changing ideas to the TEDx London stage. And now they're taking it to the next level by making this podcast possible. Thanks, City.
But wait, that is not all.
No, this podcast was produced by the amazing Josie Coulter.
Curation and research by the genius Tara Cooper.
Artwork designed by the visionaries that are Sabrina Russo and Rebecca Mingus.
Mixed and engineered by the iconic Ben Beheshti, aka The Falcon, who also composed our banging theme tune.
Presented by me, Mariam Pasha.
And by me, Ben Hurst. Stay curious.